Well, boils and ghouls, it's your old pal, John Kassir, the voice of the Crypt Keeper. And I want to welcome my good fiends of the Horror Heals podcast. Is horror good for mental wellness? But of course it is. I delight in the delicious deaths of pitiful people on the silver screen. So get ready for a hell of a good time with my new fiends, Corey and Kendall, on the Horror Heals podcast.
Welcome back, creepers and keepers of the night. You're tuning into Horror Heals, where we're here to remind you that sometimes it takes a good scare to soothe the soul. Today, we're joined by Dr. Ashley Allen, a psychologist who gets it, who gets us, and who might just help some of you realize that your love of horror might be the healthiest thing about you. All right, here comes Ashley. Welcome to Horror Heals.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. Before we get to the professional side of Ashley, let's talk a little bit about the horror side of Ashley. You mentioned our exchange that you had been a horror fan since you were a kid. How did your fascination and appreciation of horror get started?
Well, I have my mother to thank for that. She was a huge horror fan, loved 80s slashers. So I grew up watching things like Chucky, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th. And Pet Sematary was actually my first adult book that I read growing up. I was like 8 or 9, way too young, but it worked out. I've loved horror my entire life. It's been a huge part of my identity.
Wow. Pet Sematary, that's a pretty wild one for a kid to get started. A lot of interesting themes in that one,
There sure are, yes.
Yeah, that book and the movie too really stick with me just because I've had this lifelong sort of fear of death and this whole idea of, being able to bring somebody back after they've passed, and yeah. Plus you get that sister Zelda. Oh my goodness.
That's traumatizing.
Yeah, it's something else. Because that was like one of those movies, in the 80s and early 90s was on cable, nonstop. And so I know my sister's also very traumatized by Zelda coming,
Well, Corey's sister is 5 years younger than he is, so,
Right, yeah. We were all definitely watching stuff, way too early on. Very cool that your mom was into horror stuff. Like, where did her interest in horror kick off?
I have no clue. She's just always enjoyed it. And I know for me, I remember whenever the Tales from the Crypt theme song would come on, because her and my dad would watch it together, I would hide with my hands over my ears under the coffee table. And I would laugh because I just loved being scared. I had nightmares about Chucky all the time, but still loved watching it. I was just a weird kid. Yeah, and so today actually marks the 2-year anniversary of a very close friend of mine unexpectedly passing away. And that grief remains really fresh. And I feel, during that time I was watching 2 or 3, 4, depending on the day, horror movies a day, all of my comfort classics. And it was just it gave me something to do. It gave me something to focus on to get through that really acute period. I don't watch that many movies now, and I have the thought some people might consider that pretty excessive, but really the alternative was just sitting on my couch and crying nonstop when I wasn't working or doing life things. So it really kind of helped me just focus in on things that brought me comfort, that felt very familiar to me. And even, the other night I was laying in bed at 11:30 trying to go to sleep. I was watching season 5 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And that's the season where Joyce dies. And I'm just sobbing. And I'm it's 11:30 at night and I have to work tomorrow. Why am I doing this to myself? This is awful. But I really just allowed myself to cry, and watching all of the characters and how they experience grief themselves. Cried for about 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and I felt so much catharsis afterward and slept like a baby. afterwards and was ready to get up and do all the things that I needed to do the next day. And so I just find this genre to be so healing for me and for a lot of the people that I work with too, those that do like horror. Ironically enough, my friend Kat hated horror movies. The last movie we saw together was actually Elvis. So it's kind of ironic that we were friends, even though our movie interests were like on the opposite ends of the spectrum. She liked them as a kid, but not as an adult.
Well, I think every now and then, we all need a good cry. It's interesting. I don't necessarily go to horror for that. Like I've got like a handful of movies that I know will get me going that I can probably recite the dialogue to. The one that's immediately coming to mind is The Color Purple. And by the end of the movie, when the Celie character is reunited with her children, I'm just like, the waterworks, it's coming down. But it's good. And it's like, I love that. And that's one of those movies like I would be very annoying to watch with because I'll be doing like every line. We love the focus of your work, focusing on the LGBTQ youth community and neurodivergent kids. What kind of sent you on that path?
So I am queer and neurodivergent myself. I actually started off working with those that have borderline personality disorder. And the more that I worked with them, I found that there was just so much overlap with autism, ADHD, OCD, and those neurodivergent conditions, and found over time that I just resonated so deeply with those clients. And I work really well with them. I have, a lot in common with a lot of these clients, a lot of these teens and adults and even older adults, women that are being diagnosed for the first time in their 50s. And just the more I learn about it, the more I'm able to empower others. And it feels good. I love seeing people be able to accept themselves a little more, to live more authentically in alignment with their values versus trying to fit into this cishet, like neurotypical world that we're all just supposed to fit into these nice, neat little boxes. And that is not reality.
I won't bore the regular listeners with this story again, because I think I've told it 4 or 5 times now. But the inspiration for this podcast was me encountering somebody who I'm not sure what their diagnosis was, but definitely had something going on. And this was at a horror convention. It's been fun for us to sort of like look through this as like with a little bit of a scholarly lens. Kendall's definitely the scholar in the family, but I'm, the interviewer in the family. And I would be very interested to find out how neurodivergent people are able to deal with going to the big horror conventions and stuff, because they definitely are there. And, we're talking a lot of people crammed into a pretty tight space, but they do it because they've got that strong connection to horror and they want to see their friends, that they probably only get to see online otherwise. So I'm very interested to do more of an academic sort of approach to what we're doing right now.
I think it's all about values, right? Like you're willing to sacrifice a period of time of discomfort for something that is just so meaningful to you and brings you in connection with other people and the things that you love. It might be hard to go to the grocery store, but going to a horror convention with people that you love and movies that you love and just that community, like it would be really interesting to learn more about that.
Have you attended any horror conventions?
I would love to. I would love to go to the Telluride, the horror festival there, but haven't made it yet. That's on the bucket list.
Awesome. Well, I think you'll have a great time. What kind of crossover are you seeing between your interest in horror and working with your patients?
I will say, it doesn't come up super often in therapy, but I do have some clients who are neurodivergent. They're queer. They have a lot of niche, not your stereotypical interests, like listening to heavy metal music, going to metal shows, going to horror conventions, watching horror movies. The community, I think, is the biggest thing that gets them going to these things. And it is uncomfortable for them. And it just gives them a space to stim at a metal show, having that space to just be authentic. And people at metal concerts are so friendly, the nicest group of people I've ever met. And it allows them to kind of explore things that they're working through, with the movies that they are watching. I think horror provides a great way of a safe space for catharsis and just allowing us to release our emotions in a controlled setting. And it can offer kind of controlled exposure to fear and really help those with anxiety, I think, build resilience and manage stressors a bit better. For some movies, just allowing themselves to process trauma that they have been through. There's a lot of movies, a lot of horror movies out there that it centers around someone's trauma, right? Like the whole concept of the final girl and the resilience that she has to build and go through. Like, I do think it's a very cathartic and therapeutic experience for a lot of folks. And I've absolutely helped lots of clients come up with cope ahead plans for stressful situations, anniversaries, periods of copious amounts of stress. And it can involve horror movies or metal music or things that are considered more alternative and not being a little bit weird and outside of the box.
There is a lot of crossover between the heavy metal community and the horror community for sure. I saw that recently at a convention called Silver Screams, and it's hosted by this band Ice Nine Kills, a heavy metal band that kind of focuses a lot of their stuff on horror. And there were so many like 8, 9, 10-year-old kids with Ice Nine Kills, t-shirts. And I was like, wow. I mean, I've heard of the band, obviously. I was like, okay, these guys are big.
They are huge. They have entire albums dedicated to different horror movies. They have a Chucky song, a Psycho song, like 10 out of 10 recommend. Love Ice Nine Kills.
Okay, awesome. I'll have to check it out. That's not typically one of our go-to genres, no. But I will say, like, AC/DC is one of my favorite all-time bands, and I think they kind of fall into that hard rock metal a little bit, and I can get into some Ozzy and some Black Sabbath and stuff. So we'll have to check them out for sure.
One thing that I always think about too for us as a couple is if we were sitting down to watch a movie and we're in different moods, like Corey's like, oh, let's watch a comedy. And I'm like, oh, let's watch a documentary. Where we usually settle is on, a thriller. You know what I mean? It's just so interesting how that for us is, well, it's what we bonded over initially, 1,000 years ago, almost 20 yeyears ago. It's, we keep going back to that. And we have more similarities there too, like Corey's idea of comedy. I can take a little bit of it and then I'll go wash the dishes. You know what I mean? It's just not usually my thing. But yeah, I just love the commonality that horror brings to us.
I will say this, though. All you have to do is add British accents to whatever I'm watching comedy-wise, and Kendall's like, oh.
Yeah, my partner is actually from England, so the British accent, like, listening to Evolution of Horror and The Final Girls, like, those are my, those are 2 podcasts that I listen to a lot, and just the accents alone, I'm tuned in, I'm listening, I'm there.
I'm with you.
Yes, actually, our guest for this coming week's episode, or one of this week's episodes, is from London, and I could just listen to somebody read the phone book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure.
Now, just out of curiosity, this has nothing to do with horror, but is your partner a fan of Coronation Street?
Oh God.
I honestly don't know. We've never talked about that before. I'll have to ask him.
You'd know because I am a huge Coronation Street fan, which I get teased about by anyone under 60 from the UK. They're like, are you someone's grandparent? And I'm like, yep, must be. I just love it. It's just something that I enjoy a lot.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Would love to go back and find out what were the movies that you were watching to kind of help you through this tough time.
So actually during that time I was living in Denver and I had movie passes to like the 3 closest movie theaters to me. So I was going 5-6 times a week. And one of the movies that I actually saw for the first time, like just a few days after I found out that she passed, was The Crow. And of course I walked out of that movie just like tears, lots of tears. That was a big one. That fall they were doing like a John Carpenter series when they were playing all of John Carpenter's old movies, Escape from New York, The Thing, The Fog, Christine. And I grew up watching John Carpenter, so it felt like home during that time. And just, I think grief can be so isolating, even when you're going through it with other people. Like I'm very close with Kat's sister, Jessica, and like I knew that her grief was more significant than mine because she just lost her sister, whereas I had just lost a friend, not comparing. But knowing the depth of her grief was so much greater than what I was experiencing. It's still so isolating. And even just being in the theater by myself with my blanket and my popcorn and like listening to people react to these movies around me was so powerful. Especially, again, just allowing myself to kind of feel whatever it was that I was feeling at that time. And, you know, walking out of The Crow sobbing is not necessarily like most people's experiences, but there's no shame in feeling your feelings and that movie brought up a lot for me. Not only, Brandon Lee's own death in that movie, but just the themes of death and kind of coping with grief. I would say that was probably one of the biggest.
You just made me think of something. And I don't equate these things, but should have that. I think for me, the fact that I found my biological family, but my birth mother refuses to have anything to do with me, I think I kind of deal with that. If that could be a type of grief or sense of loss or longing, I feel like horror could definitely be something that always helps me there. And I just never really thought about it in that respect. So
that doesn't mean you get to charge Kendall for this session.
That's okay. That's all right. I'm happy to be here.
But it is amazing how these realizations will come to you sometimes. And I have always been, well, up until we started these podcasts, for sure, so fiercely independent and stoic and, I can fix every problem, so obviously delusional about many things. But my point is, speaking to people like this has been so humbling on many levels, as well as eye-opening for me. It really has. It's just been fantastic because to what you just said, you can feel your feelings. I think for a long time, I didn't allow myself. I built this sort of wall, and it's still there, but we're chipping away at it, right? But because I am proud and I've always needed to be independent until I found my family. So now just allowing myself to be sort of vulnerable to those relationships is completely new for me.
I bet. I can only imagine. And I think, these movies, depending on what the themes are, of course, I'm always surprised kind of what I pull from a movie, depending on like what state I'm in or what's going on in my life. I think it just gives a controlled space to kind of safely feel your emotions either independently or alongside other characters. And again, I can watch the same movie multiple times depending on what's going on in my life, and I'm going to pull something different from it every single time. It's really fascinating.
Ashley, something that was enlightening for me was when I really started to go to these horror conventions and sort of like deep dive think into what was happening there. You're like, at first glance, I'm seeing like lots of little kids dressed up like Chucky and all sorts of characters. I mean, I even met a baby dressed as Pennywise. I'm like, should a baby or a 3-year-old be at a horror convention? But I think you could speak to that, just the way you grew up, and clearly you're not out killing people, or at least you're not overtly, out killing people. So can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yes. I think there's a lot of stigma associated with horror and like alt communities, metal fans, etc. And for me, like I grew up in a pretty religious household too, which is kind of shocking considering my mom is such a horror fan. And so I remember my friends from church coming over, and like my best friend and I showed her Chucky one night, and she went home and told her mom she was never allowed back over at my house again. And so, but I wasn't the one that was like getting into trouble and like, having teenage pregnancies and like, being promiscuous or all these other things that come along with, you're into this weird stuff. Like you must be doing other, risky things. And it's like, no, I was always a pretty stable kid. And I think it's a form of artistic expression too, being able to dress up. There's an influencer that I follow that her daughter, she's like 3 or 4 and just loves Pennywise, has a little Pennywise doll that she carries around with her. And like, she loves little spooky baby dolls. But I think, every family is going to be different. Their boundaries, their limits are going to look differently, kind of depending on their own personal beliefs. But I don't think there was no significant impact of me reading Pet Sematary when I was 8 or 9. Now it's just like a fun fact that I share about myself. And I'm not a serial killer. I'm not, my goal in life is to help people and to help them process awful things that they have been through. And I think a huge part of that is how I grew up and, watching these movies and watching how people persevere through their own trauma. So I think there needs to be less judgment and less stigma around that. I'm not saying parents, show your kids Chucky when they're 2 years old, but like, yourselves, your family, like make your own limits around that, but maybe try to be a little more open because you never know what might come of it. You might spark a passion that ignites a kid's career when they grow up and to do something that they truly love. And that would be incredible.
You're exactly right. And I have to give my father, my adoptive father that I grew up with, credit, because he trusted me. And when I was, let's just say 6, and I'm asking to watch things that should be scary to a 6-year-old, he'd be like, now, are you not going to be scared? Are you going to, you know what I mean? And I would be honest. I'd be like, well, I don't know. I'll leave the room if it gets too, you know what I mean? Like, we just had that kind of relationship. And I'm so glad that he fostered that, because I would say, yeah, I'm out for this one, but I can come back next time. We'll watch something, that to him was equally frightening, but I just admire that so much, because I think it took away the fear, because I was in control of that, and I could say what I could handle and what I couldn't. And wasn't any smarter than any other kid, but it was a great way for them to have approached it, because then, I don't know, nothing seemed like a big deal, because it could always be negotiated between us.
I mean, he was definitely exposing me to stuff that I think that he appreciated. He thought, oh, well, surely, my son's going to appreciate this too. And the majority, yes, he got me watching Saturday Night Live and Mel Brooks movies and stuff and Monty Python really early. But then he also let me watch Purple Rain when I was 9 years old. And well, the music's fantastic. There's some adult themes in there. Yeah. And then he really wanted me to watch Pink Floyd's The Wall with him, which was like disturbing. And there's a scene, I don't know if you've ever seen the concert film movie version of it, but there's like a scene where there are like students like walking into a giant meat grinder and, coming out as meat. I'm like, okay, there's some horror for you.
No, I love that too, because like with your situation with your dad, like he allowed you to kind of explore your own limitations, right? Whereas a lot of parents are like, no, cover the eyes. You're too young to watch that. And what does that lead to? Like, well, now I really want to see it. I'm going to go behind your back to watch what you won't let me watch, right? And so just being able to kind of understand yourself a little bit better and like, oh, this is perfect for me, or like I'm having a great time, or no, this is too much. I need to step away, and I'll catch this next time it's on TV. And that's fantastic.
You don't think of those things as they're happening, but as you get older, you're like, oh, that was a very smart thing or at least it worked for me. You know what I mean? Like, it might not work for every child, but
right.
It really helped me kind of not be scared, because when we would watch scary things, I tended to not react to them the way that other kids my age probably would have, just because I was like, oh, this is all make-believe and it's fine. And, that was just kind of the way we approached all the horror stuff.
Going back to the themes of stigma and acceptance and non-judgment, I do feel like I'm never being judged when I'm at a horror convention. And, I'm not walking around, as a leather daddy or anything like that, but I do dress.
Why not? Why not?
But I don't think anybody would mind, but I do, dress pretty flashy, fabulous. And like, I get compliments. I don't get judgment. And, it's like, just like I'm not going to go up and judge the guy his face is covered in tattoos either. It's like, we're all here because we enjoy the same stuff. And, at the end of the weekend, somebody's going back to their law practice and somebody's going back to, being a nurse and whatever, it's just, I love the community in that way. It's just, it's definitely been a source of therapy, for me.
It has. I think horror just brings people in community, right? Even like in the theaters, online, like Letterboxd, I've met several people off of Letterboxd that, we became friends. And even just like showing my close friends, like Rosemary's Baby for the first time, like watching them experience that, like it's just such a unique opportunity. I'm sure it exists for other movie genres too, but there's something special about horror. I think I'm biased.
I know I am.
No, it's great. We've bonded with family over it. We've got twin niece and nephew who are 22 now. Yeah. But when they were, 12, we took them to their first, haunted attraction and had such a blast. We're all screaming and everything. And one of the horror actors pulled Kendall aside and said, what's his name? Yes. Well, his name is Jake. And like 10 minutes later, so it wasn't immediate, like 10 minutes later, you hear, Jake, I'm coming for you.
It was hilarious. It was great.
Oh, yeah, it's great. And like our niece that's about to turn 16, like she's dipping her toes into the horror water, you know. She's a big fan of the movie Pearl, but she's not quite ready for the full-on, like, go to the haunted house, you know, quite yet. But I would love to be there with her, you know, when she does do it the first time. I know when she's gotten better, because when she was younger, like, they would go to the theme parks when it was in October, and like they had to leave before dusk because she couldn't even see anybody dressed out, you know.
Yeah.
Like Pennywise, yeah. And Pennywise still gets her.
Yeah, there's still the spectrum, right? Like there's The Exorcist and Pearl. Like there's a lot in between, and I think there's a movie out there for everybody, and yet there's still some stigma, like, oh, it's horror, I don't want to watch it. It's like, well, you might actually get a lot out of this movie. Just try it.
Oh, there's hundreds of genres, you know, within horror. And I think you're right. If people were, and there's like stuff like my mom would be, you know, like she won't, oh, I don't like horror, but she'll watch a thriller. And it's like, well, you know, it's very, very close to, just because the person doesn't have razor fingers doesn't.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good point.
So, Ashley, the question that we ask everyone, the final question we ask all of our guests is, who is your favorite final person in a horror movie?
My goodness. Lately, I would have to say Mia Goth. I'm just like obsessed with her and everything that she does. But really, I think it's Jamie Lee Curtis. Like, she was the original. I've watched every single Halloween movie. Like, she's such an icon. I think she's a great example of like resilience in horror and what we're watching. And so, yeah, a little new, a little old, a little in between.
There you get it.
I like that. Yeah. And, you know, Jamie Lee Curtis, I don't know if you follow her on Instagram, but, you know, she is awesome, and she's an ally, and I can't say enough nice things about her.
Yeah.
Hint, Jamie, please come on the show.
One of my favorites is Adrienne King, who was the final person at the end of the first Friday the 13th. And she's already been one of our guests. So, I mean, that wasn't why I chose her before we even knew she was going to be a guest. But I just, you know, I love that franchise, and I thought that she brought a lot to that first, you know, role. It's tough to be the first, I think, and then, you know, have others come behind you.
Well, and just to have that like incredible jump scare ending too. I mean, that's one of the greats, for sure. And funnily enough, Adrienne King's favorite final person is Mia Goth.
Excellent. Yeah, she's amazing. I've loved everything she's been in.
Very cool.
Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic. Please stay in touch with us. Hopefully we can get to visit with you again.
Would love that. Thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
And that's a wrap on another episode of Horror Heals. Huge thanks to Dr. Ashley Allen for peeling back the layers of fear and reminding us that whether you're at a horror convention, a heavy metal show, or just binge watching Buffy with tissues nearby, there's a place in the horror world for everyone. Remember, sometimes facing the darkness is the best way to let in the light. Until next time, stay spooky, stay safe, and keep screaming, my friends. And remember, if someone says, horror is good for mental wellness, you tell them, of course it is. The Horror Heals podcast is produced and presented by How the Cow Ate the Cabbage, LLC.